Are you interested in learning to paint landscapes in watercolor, but you aren't sure how to get started? Do you love painting mountain scenes, like I do, and water reflections, but you struggle to get the results you want? In this video, I'm going to share a complete step-by-step tutorial showing you how I paint this mountain scene in watercolor. This is Mount Shuksan, near where I live. In addition to seeing my step-by-step process, I provide detailed explanations of my painting process. I show the supplies and materials I use and the colors I use and my thought process as I paint this beautiful scene. If you'd like to paint along, you can download the reference image, a contour line drawing, and a list of all the materials I used in this painting. This is a complete watercolor painting lesson. If this sounds interesting to you, keep on watching. Hi, welcome to my studio. My name is Kris. This channel is all about tools, tips, and tutorials for growing in watercolor. In addition to the resources on this channel, I also have a growing collection of free and premium downloads and courses on my website at studio.krisdebruine.com. I encourage you to check it out. If you're just getting started in watercolor and you are confused by all the choices out there for brushes, paper, paints, and palettes, I encourage you to join my free online course, Getting Started in Watercolor, where I go over in detail the specific supplies and materials you need. I focus on the essentials, not the frills. I even share how I set up my watercolor painting area. Thousands of beginning artists have used this resource to make a confident beginning in watercolor. I encourage you to follow the link in the description below. Okay, let's get back to the tutorial. Here's my lesson on how to paint a mountain with its reflection in watercolor. Let's get started with this painting tutorial of a mountain and its reflection in a lake. The first thing I'm doing here, as you can see in the video, is I'm going to wet the entire surface of the paper. I'm using 140-pound, 100% cotton Bahong watercolor paper taped to a board. It's about 30 degrees of an angle. And I'm taking a natural sponge, and it's pretty wet, and I am going down the full surface of the paper in both directions and getting it nice and wet. I don't always wet my paper entirely like I'm doing here, but I decided in this painting I wanted a very soft, wonderfully blended gradient of colors from yellow to kind of an orangey color to the blue of the sky. And I felt the best way to attain that would be to have very wet paper. When you have real wet paper, you're going to avoid hard edges. You're also going to find it easier to blend the colors one into the other. And so that's why I wet the paper. Now, I'm choosing my transparent yellow oxide. You can see that in the upper left corner of the palette. And I'm bringing into that a very warm red, a Pyrrol Red, to make an orange color. And I put that in the upper kind of left quadrant of the sky. And I'm repeating that color or mirroring that color in the lake. This, by the way, is Shuksan Mountain in Northwest Washington State, United States of America. It's near my home. I love it. It's my favorite place to paint. And it's called Picture Lake. Beautiful lake that reflects the mountain in the distance. I think it's considered one of the most photographed mountains in the world, just because of the situation of that beautiful picture lake in front of the mountain. Very picturesque, beautiful. Anyways, okay. I went ahead and also brought in a little Quin Gold into my mix of that yellow there. Kind of strengthened the brilliant yellow of that part of the sunset. Or sorry, this is a sunrise, not a sunset. Now, I'm bringing in my Cerulean Blue. This is a common color I use for my sky color. But I have to be careful here, because when I bring the blue of the sky up against any kind of yellow or gold color, I'm going to get green. I don't want green in the sky. So what I do, as you can see I'm doing here, I'm mixing in some of that warm red, Pyrrol Red, into my blue, creating a purplish color. So where the in between, I should say, the gold or yellow color of the sky and the blue, I need to situate some more orange and red colored tones so that I don't get green. And so I go from my yellows into a reddish orange and then into the blues, and that keeps that from happening. All right. Now I've also mixed up some of my blue, cerulean blue, with a little bit of my red, and I'm creating kind of a purpley color there, a bluish color, and I'm going into the lake. Again, I'm mirroring the lake colors in below from what I see above. Also, the lake colors are darker. It's clearly darker tones or values in the lake than I see in the sky. So I'm representing that here in that reflection. By the way, you can get my full contour line drawing and my reference images. This is an image I took, so I own the copyright on it and provide it for you free of charge. You can find all this on my website at krisdebruine.com. I'll leave a link down below. You'll just need to enter your email address and receive a digital download of my reference images for this painting. So you can paint along as I paint this. I really encourage you to do that. Now, I've gone ahead and I brought in some green gold. These are all Daniel Smith colors, by the way. Love Daniel Smith brand colors. I recommend them. I'll leave links to all the colors in the description below as well. I'm mixing up my cerulean blue with some of that green gold. I'm bringing in, I see it's a little too brilliant of a green, so I'm bringing in some of my permanent alizarin crimson, which is over there in the kind of the 7 o'clock position, 8 o'clock position on my palette. When I bring in red into a greenish color, I'm going to be neutralizing that color, right? Because I've got now all three colors, primary colors in my mix. I've got the blue and yellow that makes the green, plus I'm bringing in the red. That combination of all three primaries neutralizes the color, giving me more of a neutralized or grayed color. And I want that in that reflection area. Now here is my reference image here. I'm showing it to you here. As I mentioned earlier, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to provide a link to this in a digital download file you can get for free so you can follow along. But occasionally I might put this reference image here up in the upper right corner. I don't put it there the entire painting process because I really want you to be able to see this palette. I want you to see the colors I'm mixing, see the colors I'm choosing on my palette, because that's important. And so I can't really provide that information as well as providing the reference image here. And so again, I've just decided to make my reference images available to you on my website. So I encourage you to go get those. All right, now I'm back. I've kind of finished my first wash of the sky and the lake. And now I'm going back to the land mass in the mid area of the picture. And there's a very bright green, almost yellowish color of land right where the trees hit the lake. And there's a beautiful reflection of that bright green. It's probably it's really, I would almost say, one of the focal areas of the painting. A beautiful bright green area of foliage that comes right down to the lake. And then above and below that area, of that line, that horizon line, there will be darker trees. So I've mixed up a little darker green, a little bit more of a sap green color. I like to often use my green gold and mix in some blue, often Indanthrone Blue or French ultramarine, something like that, to darken the color. I'm also mixing in some of my Quin Gold here to give some more gold color to those trees. If you look closely at the tree line in the reference image, you'll see a real myriad of beautiful colors, bright greens, dark greens, golden colors, and I'm trying to capture all of that. Now let's talk a little bit about reflection of these trees into the water down below. As I go through this process here, I'm going to carefully be looking at my reference image, and whatever I paint above the tree line, or excuse me, above the horizon line at the lake's edge, I want to repeat that or mirror that in the lake down below. That can be somewhat of a tricky process because you really have to kind of flip the image around in your head and paint its mirror image down below. You just want to follow the reference image as you do that. Now again, I'm painting on wet paper. I got the paper nice and wet at the beginning. It's still wet at this point. So as I put down this paint, you can see the edges of the areas I'm painting are nice and soft. That's because the paint is being diffused out into the fibers of the paper because the paper is wet. And I've got a fairly wet mix of paint and water in my brush. And so that water and paint pigment is just spreading out into the paper, and that gives me that soft edge, which is what I want in this first wash. Let's talk a little bit about brushes. I'm using here probably my favorite brush that I use. You'll see me use it all the time in my videos. This is a Princeton Aqua Elite Quill number 6. It is a quill brush, meaning it has an unusual ferrule. That's the place where you can see I'm holding onto the brush there, a place where the bristles connect to the handle of the brush. And it's got a plastic sleeve surrounding that area with some metal bands or metal wire holding it all together. And if you see that, that's a quill brush. Quill, quill. This is a number 6 quill. Now don't let the number fool you. The numbering system on quill brushes is very different than the numbering system on traditional round brushes. A number 6 traditional round brush in watercolor would be very small. This number 6 quill, however, is quite large in size. But what's beautiful about it is that beautiful point. See how finely pointed that brush is? And I can do this kind of fine detailing brushwork in the tree line here. And that's because I have a finely tipped, beautifully sharp pointed brush. Love it. But at the same time as it has a sharp point, it also holds a lot of water and pigment. That big belly, I don't know if you can relate to that. I have a big belly, but this brush has a big belly too. And that big belly holds a lot of water, okay? That's the main central part of the bristles. We call that the belly of the brush. And it holds a lot of water and pigment. And so you can go for a long time as you kind of paint an area. You can paint without having to go back to the palette and pick up more water, more paint. You can paint for a while with that color you've picked up without having to go back to the palette, and that's very handy. So as you can see what I'm doing here. Okay, I'm using that brush. Now I mixed up a little darker color with my green, and I'm using this beautiful quill brush and painting in the tree line. Again, it's wet on wet, so it's very loose. Whatever I paint above the line, the horizon line at the lake's edge, I'm also repeating that same shape, generally speaking, in the water down below. Now there's more detail in the actual trees above the lake line than you would probably see in the reflection. And that's because the water, the ripples on the lake surface and things like that, kind of disturb the image or the reflection of the trees. And so it's not perfectly represented. What we see above is not perfectly represented in the lake, but it's close. And so you don't have to worry about getting it exactly right in the lake. When people view your painting, they'll kind of skip right over those little details, and they just see a general reflection. As you can see, whatever I've painted above is pretty much represented in the reflection down below. At this point in the painting process, I've finished the sky, the reflection in the lake, and that tree line. But before I'm done with the first wash, I pretty much need to come back now and put in the basic shapes of the mountain. I have mixed up my Cerulean Blue with some of my permanent alizarin crimson, creating a purpley color that you see on my palette there. I'm still using a very thin wash of paint and water. This is probably a coffee consistency of paint. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about with that tea, coffee, cream analogy of paint, then you might want to check out my course on my site at KrisDeBruine.com, studio.KrisDeBruine.com, where I have a course called Foundations in Watercolor. where you can learn all about the foundations and basic principles of painting in watercolor. But anyways, I'm mixing up this kind of purpley color, and I'm using now I'm using a little of my warm red, my Pyrrol Red, mixing in with my blues, and I'm kind of creating this purple color. And I've switched to a finer tipped brush. This is my Princeton Aqua Elite number 12 round. I'm using also a little bit of Cobalt Blue in here. The exact colors of paint, or I should say the exact brands or specific type of paint isn't as important as whether or not it's kind of a warm red or a cool red, or kind of a warm blue or a cool blue. Because when you mix warm and blue, different colors together, you get just really different mixes. And I'm interested in getting a very neutralized color that leans towards gray, that is a purplish color. And so I'm mixing the colors I've just mentioned there to you and trying to get this purple color. You can see it on my palette. You can try to match that color. It's really good to learn how to see a color on a person's painting or in a reference image, and just be able to mix colors until you get that similar color. Again, more about that in my other course. I'm kind of changing my colors up here a little bit. Sometimes more purple, sometimes a little more leaning blue. And again, using this fine tip brush, just kind of carefully looking at the reference image. I really want to get the patterns of rock versus glacier, which is very distinctive on this mountain. Again, Mount Shuxen. I've looked at this mountain a million times, so I'm very familiar with what the patterns of snow and rock are. And really doesn't change that much from year to year. The glaciers there kind of are in that center area of the mountain. There's also some strips of snow on the right-hand side of the mountain where I'm painting now. And so I'm just painting around those areas that would be snow or glacier, and painting in very lightly these rock formations on the mountain. As I finish up the mountain above the tree line, I now need to turn my attention to the reflection of the mountain in the lake. As you can see on my palette, I've mixed up a much darker version of this bluish gray color. And this would be coffee into more of a milk consistency of paint. Basically, I'm getting more and more pigment in the mix and less water, which thickens the paint to water consistency, giving me a darker version or tone of my paint. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the reflection is darker than the actual mountain above, as if you look at the reference image. And that's usually true because the tones in the lake, I don't know, there's probably a scientific reason for it, why the reflection is typically darker than the actual image that's being reflected. Probably has to do with the water, the depth of the lake, things like that. But anyways, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not exactly sure why. But I'm just careful to mix up a darker tone of paint, similar color but darker. And now again, I'm just following the pattern of the mountains and snow and glacier that I see above that I've already painted, and just kind of flipping it over in my brain, also looking at the reference image, and just repeating that pattern in the water. Again, I didn't mention this earlier, but prior to starting the painting of the mountain, I actually did let the painting dry. That's important. And the reason for that, again, if you're painting on wet paper, you're going to get a much softer edge. The paper and water will diffuse and spread out, and the edges will be soft if the paper's wet. But if the paper's dry, as it is here, you're going to get much crisper and stronger edges. And I really wanted a nice, strong, sharp edge along the edge of the mountain where it meets with the sky and where it meets with the reflections there in the lake. Because really, the mountain is the focal point of the painting, and sharp edges create greater contrast with the shapes and colors that shape is next to. And so those sharper edges, stronger contrast, will cause the viewer, cause their eye to be attracted to that area and creates greater interest in the painting. So I wanted those sharp edges, and so that's what I'm trying to create. As you can see, as we go along now up to this point, the painting's really starting to come together. You know, that mountain reflection is just gorgeous, right? And it's a beautiful mountain. I love painting it. One of my favorite places in the world to paint. Never get tired of this. I've painted the scene several times. Speaking of that, I highly encourage you to paint scenes more than once, because you really start to learn about the subject matter and how to paint it. All right, now, what am I doing now? I kind of let the painting dry again, and I'm coming back with a very light mixture of blue. You can see over there on the right-hand side, lower right corner, 4 o'clock on the palette, I've mixed up a very light tea consistency mix of very light blue. And what I'm doing right now is I'm actually painting over those snow or glacier areas of the painting that were white, and I'm adding a slight bluish cast to them. Because the painting is dry at this point, the first layers of paint are not really being affected. They're not moving much. They're not changing much because they're already dry, and I'm painting very lightly over them. I didn't want such a strong white contrast in the paint, in the snow and glacier areas, the white areas. I felt they were a little too stark, a little too abrupt. And because we understand when we paint landscapes that there's always what's called aerial perspective. It is the lightning and the blue cast that is applied to objects in a landscape that are far away. Anything that's far away tends to be bluer, cooler, lighter in tone quite often. And so I wanted to get that effect on the snow. Okay, we just finished that section, and again, I let it dry. I came back, as you can see now, and I have mixed up a nice dark green, thick consistency of paint. I am moving now from a milk consistency of paint into more of a cream consistency. Think about half and half milk, cream. It is thicker than coffee or milk. And so and again, these are just very general and descriptions of the paint, but you get the idea. It's just a way of trying to explain the consistency of water to pigment, which is so important when you're mixing your paints. Okay, so I've mixed up this thicker consistency of paint. It is my green gold mixed with my Indanthrone Blue. Indanthrone Blue is similar in temperature to French ultramarine, but it's darker. And it's easier to get these dark green, almost blackish colors of green. And so this is the kind of final stage of this painting. I am putting in this beautiful line of trees that you see here in the reference image. And it really separates kind of right down the middle of the painting, the sky area above, the sky and mountain, separating that from its reflection in the lake below. And I think the contrast that's created between the lighter values in the lake and the sky, and even the mountain for that matter, and the dark contrast with the trees, creates interest. And so I'm trying to capture that here. Again, I'm using that Princeton Aqua Elite round number 12 brush, another one of my favorite brushes. Often as I move through the painting from the first wash into the middle and later parts of the painting, I switch from bigger brushes, like the quill I used earlier, into a smaller brush. And that's because I'm usually moving into areas of smaller detail. And so with smaller details, you need usually a little bit smaller brush. Also, I don't need the big belly of a quill brush that holds lots of water, because if I had too much water on my brush right now, then that water would spread out into the painting and would just introduce too much water into the painting at this point, and I don't want that, so I got to be careful. So I move from a quill to a traditional round brush. A traditional round brush, as you can see, has a ferrule. It's just a metal sleeve, and it has a smaller belly. It still has a fine point like the quill, but it's just a smaller brush and it holds less water. Less water is going to make a big difference in the painting process at this point. Okay, and I'm just continuing from left to right, painting this tree line, painting carefully whatever I see above the horizon line, above the edge of the lake, and then repeating that same shape, same color, same value for the most part. Whatever I see above the tree line or above the lake line, I'm going to paint that down below as well. And again, whatever I paint above, I'm flipping upside down and painting that in the bottom. I'm being very careful, as you can see here, to keep some of the lighter values of the tree line that I painted in the first wash. Especially right there, that line that goes along the lake edge, which I mentioned earlier is that kind of bright yellow, light green color. It is the foliage of the bushes that grow right up to the edge of the lake. And I want to make sure I keep that. And so the way I keep that light valued area is just not paint over it when I get into this next stage of the painting. Now, much of this process of painting the tree line is somewhat repetitive. And so I'm speeding up the video here and just kind of shortening the tutorial a bit, but I think you get the idea. I'm using a very dark, thick consistency of paint, and I'm carefully painting the tree line as I see it and its reflection down below. I tend to paint one part of the tree line and then go down and paint its reflection and just go back and forth, back and forth. I am careful to keep the light areas that I painted in the first wash that are important to the composition and not painting over those areas. Now, we call this negative painting, which you've probably heard of before. It's where you're not painting the object itself, but painting around the object. So, for example, those bushes in the middle ground of the painting, which are important and that are bright yellow and green, have a very distinctive shape, and I'm painting around those shapes with a darker paint of the trees that are behind the bushes. Now in watercolor, we know we work from light to dark, so I'm mixing up even darker paint here and just adding some real final dark details to the tree line. All right, I've let the paint dry at this point, and now I'm ready to handle really the last part of this painting, which is the reflection and the details in the lake in the lower right corner. If you look at the reference image, you'll see that's actually grass in the lake that is represented by that bright, brilliant light green that I painted in the first wash. But it also has a very interesting kind of dark value, purpley dark value. Because we're looking right into the water here close to the edge of a lake. And so the water is very dark in this area. And so in order to capture the sense of that bright green grass that's laying on the edge of, or on the surface of the water, I've mixed up a very dark, thicker version of my neutralized bluish purple color. And I'm starting to paint that. I'm careful to do, again, negative painting, keeping areas of that bright green visible in the shape. The shapes are horizontally oriented because this is grass that's kind of laying on the surface of the water. And I want that bright green to come up against this dark purpley, almost black color that I'm mixing. Now it's important to note that where this dark color comes up against the lighter color of the lake, I have softened that edge, taking my brush with a lot of water in it and softening that edge. Okay, back down here to the lower right corner of the painting. Again, very dark paint. Sometimes I mix in a bit more green, as you can see I've done here. This is the green gold color. I absolutely love that color. It's important to change up the color of your wash as you move through an area like this. You don't want just to be all one color. So I've started with a very dark bluish purple, but I'm also bringing in greens. Sometimes I'm also thinning out the paint a bit so that I get a lighter value of that same color, and just carefully painting the shape of the grass. Careful to retain the lighter highlights. And once again, this process is somewhat repetitive, so I'm speeding up the video. I go back and forth from my dark blue color, with the purple hints to it, into my greenish color. I'm blending it carefully into the lake, the smoother lake area up above the grass, and just kind of finishing off this area. Again, careful to look at my reference image to get a sense of what this area looks like in the original image. Now I take a step back from my painting just to see if there's any areas that need a little bit of adjusting. Just carefully evaluating the painting against the reference image. Also squinting at the painting to see if there's any differences in value from the reference image to the actual painting. And I feel like the tree line could use a little darkening in areas, so I've mixed up my green, but I've really made it a very dark, almost black green, taking my green gold, some blue, and even mixing in a little bit of neutral tint to get a very grayish dark color. Just come back and adjust some of the tree shapes there, and wherever I add shape and value to some of the trees, I repeat that in the reflection down below. I feel like the contrast between the tree line and the rest of the painting, the sky, the mountain, and the reflection in the lake, are very important contrasts, dark to light. You can see that in the reference image. So I'm pushing that value contrast a little bit by darkening the tree shapes. Okay, now I'm nearing the end of this painting process. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. As you can see, I'm putting in the final touches here in the painting. If you'd like to paint along with this painting, please check out and download the digital download on my website at studio.krisdebruine.com. There'll be a link in the description below. You can get the contour line image that you can trace or transfer to your paper. You can get the reference image, even a grayscale image of the painting, and a short list of the colors, the materials, and supplies that I used in this painting. Basically, it'll provide you with everything you need to know to follow this tutorial. Here I am removing the tape. I love this point in the painting process where you get that nice crisp edge along the edge of the painting and that white border. Again, if you're interested in more resources and more tutorials in watercolor, check out my website at studio.krisdebruine.com. Thanks for subscribing if you haven't already, and consider clicking on the notification button so you're notified every time I put out a new video like this. Thanks, have a great day, and keep on growing in watercolor.